start with the salute.
Yeah, let's start with a toast. Does anyone want to make a toast?
Thank you to Maureen.
Thank you, Maureen.
And to Feasting and Foraging.
Excellent.
And to Doug for
Yeah.
experimenting on us.
So deliciously, right?
All right, so what I was going to talk about was, like Maureen said, symposium. And symposiums started out as drinking parties. So if you think about symposia today, if I invite you to a symposium, sorry, what do you have in mind? You think of sampling, cider, anything like that? What do you think of? Yeah.
My idea, actually, coming from Italy, we are closest to Greece. So what I remember about symposium is drinking party where anybody can bring a new idea to the table, and the idea is discussed by everybody while everybody is drinking.
So you use it in that sense today?
Was a party a couple of years ago like that, but it's no use anymore. I know that the ancient Greek used like at the time of Aristotle, as
That's
Plato.
what I'm going to talk about. Yeah. So we're talking about what happens today as symposium. What else do you guys think of? There are drinking parties that sometimes get called.
Contemporary symposium?
Yeah.
Like
A lecture hall. Suits and ties. Usually a table. A lot of
tags.
What's that?
Name tags.
Name tags. Yeah. People sitting in there, and each one has their turn. Do they? Yeah. Usually. Do they let you drink? Unless bring in a flask. What's that?
I wish.
Yeah.
For some of them, it would be much better.
They give you coffee, which just makes you jittery, and then you have to sit for an hour, and hopefully it's interesting. Hopefully it's something where people are coming and they've got something to contribute. But I know I've been to my share of symposia where, particularly if they're after dinner, you really would like to get out of there. So the question is, how do we go from something like what you're describing, people getting together, drinking, talking about ideas, which was the classic symposium, to these admittedly rather boring academic affairs of today. So what I'd like to talk about is what the Greek symposia were like, because I think we all have some pictures of those in our mind, and talk about some of what we would call the literary monuments. So, for example, Aristotle actually wrote a symposium. We don't have it. It's been lost to antiquity. But there are other literary monuments which we have. One of the key themes that you see coming up over and over again in symposia, the literary ones, is something that I call moderation in the good. And you might say, well, why do that? It's a drinking party. Drinking parties are supposed to be as fun as you can possibly make them. They had some pretty definite ideas. And then we'll talk about how we wound up with the sort of stilted suit tie conference table type of symposium that we have today, and then we can talk about how we might do more things like this. So what I'll do is I'll talk about each bit and then sort of field questions, open it up for comments, and then I'll go into the next portion of it. So let's think about what Greek symposia. This also did catch on, once Greek culture had infiltrated Rome, and sort of spread throughout the Hellenistic world. These drinking parties that they had, these dinner parties, they were quite popular. But what did they actually do? Many of you remember from humanities classes, things were like looking at Greek faces, so that they have scenes. What sort of things do you remember? What's that? Multiple speakers, yeah, it wouldn't be just, that's why this is not quite like a symposium, because you wouldn't have one person just giving one long speech. Hey! Yeah. In Plato's Symposium, the theme they're giving speeches about what is the nature of love. They're supposed to be praising love. They criticize each other sometimes for not doing a good job halfway through. One guy actually shows up at the end and doesn't give a speech about love, but a speech about his love. Somebody who's in love with Socrates. And if you look at the other symposia, they have fun. It's like to stick to more or less successful. What else? What do you think about? We know they were drinking parties, so what were they drinking?
they were drinking an extremely strong wine, more concentrated than the one that we are drinking nowadays.
Yes.
So they used to dilute with other water, probably.
Exactly.
For making more pleasant to drink.
Yes. Plutarch actually talks about this saying that they had: drink not 4, but 3 or 5. And so you think, well, okay, maybe I'm supposed to have 3 drinks or 5 drinks, not 4 drinks, because there's something unlucky about 4. That actually had to do with the proportions of mixing. So they had this very strong wine, and they would have to dilute it with water. And the proportion of 4 was 1 part wine to 3 parts water. And they consider that's a little bit too diluted to have fun. Plutarch actually says that's good for like when you're judging court cases. The proportion of 5 was 2 parts wine to 3 parts water, so that's getting pretty strong for this kind of stuff, right? Then the proportion of 3 is 2 parts water to 1 part wine, and that was seen as it's a little weaker, but it's still good enough to have a fun time. So they're drinking wine. Usually they would have a dinner beforehand. The dinner is not the main part. As a matter of fact, in Xenophon Symposium, he talks about them having the dinner in silence, not saying anything the whole time they're eating, until this guy shows up who's kind of a comedian. What else? How would this be different than our own dinner parties or drinking bouts? Think about, what's that? More intelligent? It depends on who you hang out with, doesn't it? Yeah.
Symposium would have been called for the purpose of discussion of a particular thing, as opposed to discussing whatever happens to come up in the midst of drinking.
Not that. Now they are, right? We schedule, we're going to have a symposium on the global order. Bring in some experts. You would get some people that you knew were on the ball intellectually, and bring them, so you wouldn't just grab any schlep off the street. But they didn't usually have the theme worked out ahead of time, and anybody could sort of propose what they wanted to talk about. So that's not a distinguishing characteristic of that kind of symposium. Think about how we're sitting right now. Is this how they would have a symposium?
No.
What do you know of ancient Greek having fun leisure time?
It'd be, everybody would be basically equal. There wouldn't be one person at the top
Yeah.
speaking and informing.
There might be certain during part of it. They would say, okay, now it's this person's turn to give a speech, this person's turn to give a speech.
Well, just to keep order, though.
I'm thinking, well, no. In Plato's Symposium, there are speeches, and each person does give a speech, and everyone's listening attentively during that part. There is a person in charge, the archon, the ruler of it. In that case, it's Eryximachus. But they had to do more with like how much wine people were drinking. Not some. They weren't like the master of ceremonies. I'm thinking more about like the fact that you're sitting.
They would have been reclining
On what?
couches.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone was laying on couches. That's how they ate too. They would have tables. This goes all the way back to Homeric times. The Greeks and the Romans picked this up later. They thought, why sit in chairs? Lay down. That's much more comfortable. You can take it easy, and you just spend the whole night on one couch. Actually, they would share the couches. There's a lot of discussion in Plato's Symposium about who's sitting next to who and what that means, and who's missing out on sitting next to the attractive person and who's not. Anything else that you remember about these symposiums? Yes, they were actually held in the men's section. These were always held in somebody's big house. So there'd be a men's section of the house, and at least Athenian society, Spartan society was a little bit better towards women than Athenian society, but Athenian society had a very rigid gender separation. And so there might be some women at the symposium, but they would be entertainers. They would not be the wives. The wives would be doing something else off there. As a matter of fact, I'm forgetting his name, but there's one character in Xenophon Symposium who actually gets made fun of because he wants to get home to see his wife. He's trying to get out of there a little bit early. So these tended to be all male affairs. So you can see that real contrast between what we call symposia today, or even what we call dinner parties today. You know, it's good form. Is it good form in a dinner party to just invite men? Those of you who are etiquette experts, does that make sense? You probably wouldn't enjoy that sort of party that much. Or should you just invite all women? That might not be enjoyable either. We tend to mix things, right? The ancient Greeks had different conceptions about that. Now, what they would do is start drinking. They would have that fortified wine, and, well, it's not technically fortified, it was just very strong wine, mix it together, start drinking, pour out some libations, and start talking. And in some of the symposia that we have, it's very sort of formulaic. Now so-and-so is going to give a speech, now so-and-so is going to give a speech. In others, they're just sort of records of conversation. And one of the things that we see happening in these quite a bit is people messing with each other. They would tell jokes about each other. They would sort of, pick on each other at certain points. This is actually a problem. Some symposia would break down into brawls. We don't have those as literary monuments, but we know about them because in the things that we have, there's cautions about don't let these kind of people drink too much. The person who's in charge of the wine, don't pick somebody who has a bad temper, or who's too strict or who's too lenient, because everybody will get upset or won't get drunk enough or will get too drunk and it'll degenerate. So there's this sense of what you could call measure to it. Measure and moderation. So any questions or comments or things like that at this point?
I was wondering about, do they degenerate into orgies sometimes? I mean, were you supposed to
Well,
be impressive enough that you could get the your beloved to be attracted to you?
You mean were people relying on the
it's
effect
a
of alcohol?
cerebral thing, right? There's this sort of cerebral veneer, but really, why you're giving these speeches? Sometimes you get the sense to attract that special someone that you wanted to impress them with your
In the
knowledge.
symposia that we have records of, there's no breaking out to explicit sexual activity during those. Although at the end of Xenophon's Symposium, it's not the participants, it's the entertainers, the dancers. There's a young woman and a young man, and they're supposed to represent Ariadne and Dionysus, an old Greek legend of Dionysus marrying Ariadne. And they end up kissing. And the people that are watching it can tell that this is not play acting, that these two are real. And then they're going to go off. It's hinted they're going to go off and consummate their love. But there's no actual hanky-panky going on. Did historical symposia, which we don't have records of, ever break down into that sort of thing? Probably. We don't know. More often, we do know that some broke down into brawls. People couldn't get along with each other after drinking. And they are talking a lot about erotic topics in Plato's Symposium and in Xenophon's Symposium as well. So, there's room for that. Any other,
What other types of topics do you cover?
So it could be anything ranging from the quality of the horses that they own and how to tell whether a horse is a good horse, to issues in what they called natural philosophy at the time, which tended to be things like, why is the sea salty? Or why does salt water seem to dry quicker than dry water? Physical problems, which seem kind of boring, frankly, when you read through them. To questions like, what is beauty? Who's more beautiful? Thinking about each other's ways of life and comparing them. Local politics. These are the things that we know about from the literary. What took place in other symposia, we don't really know. But they were, these were occasions for having a good time. Oftentimes, symposia would happen, to go back to the scheduling thing, they would be scheduled often after somebody had done something great. Agathon wins the contest for tragedies. He gets to have a symposium at his house. A young man is coming out into Athenian society, sort of like a debutante ball for women in past in Xenophon's Symposia. Therefore, we're going to have a symposium. But they wouldn't say, well, we need to discuss this important matter of state. Let's get drunk and we'll work it all out. Any other questions?
So it was more like a bullshit session. It wasn't actually setting any policy for the state.
Well, the ones that we have, it's more than just bullshit.
Thank you.
You know, it's pretty high-level philosophy that's being discussed in Plato's Symposium. Xenophon's, there's a lot more back and forth, zinging each other, but they are debating important topics like what way of life is best. And they're not just sort of talking, as we would say, out of their rears. They actually have good reasons for what they think. Xenophon's is usually regarded as less philosophical than Plato's. This is actually a good transition point to talk about the symposia that we have and the documents that unfortunately we don't. So we have Plato's Symposium, and people tend to read that most often in philosophy classes, sometimes in literature classes. That one's the most philosophically astute one. They're giving high-level discussions of what is the nature of love itself. Xenophon is another student of Socrates, and he gives us a description of a symposium that took place in which Socrates is, again, one of the main characters, but there's other people involved. We know that Aristotle wrote a piece called the Symposium. We don't know anything about it, because most of Aristotle's works have actually been lost. We know this from the listings of Aristotle's works that we have in Diogenes Laertes. So it's an unfortunate thing. Epicurus, from whom we get the word Epicure and Epicurean, he wrote a symposium. That one, if we had, you would actually, we don't have it, you would probably be disappointed with it, because Epicurus had nothing to do with Epicureanism as we think about it today. That would be more another guy in antiquity called Aristippus. We tend to think of Epicurean as sort of debauchery or high-level food and wine, that sort of thing. It didn't mean that in ancient times. Epicurus was all for eating the simplest food possible, hanging out in the garden with your friends, and talking about the nature of the universe to distract you from the fear of death and the gods. So one thing that we do know about Epicurus' symposium is that they did discuss a topic that some people thought they shouldn't. When should people have sex? When is the best time to actually get together and have sex? And Epicurus' answer was hardly ever. So that might be a little surprising. A lot of the ancient Greeks had this idea that that sex was actually harmful for the male body. That you had a limited supply of energy and you better not use it up. The Epicureans were atomists. They believed that everything was sort of reducible to physical structures, and they thought that most times of the day were not good for sex, because sex is going to shake up the body to begin with, and heat and drinking and things like that, those are already shaking up the body. You want to keep the body as calm as possible. So what we do know of Epicurus' symposium is it might have been kind of prudish and boring compared to other things. Some of you may know of another literary document that is telling something sort of like a symposium by another, you could consider him a Greek philosopher, Athanaeus. He wrote the Dacma Sophistae. Does it ring a bell to anybody? The philosophers at the dinner table? Yeah. Did you read that in one of your classes here?
I have a degree in philosophy.
Oh, okay.
It's been about 5 years, and I haven't done anything with it, so it's kind of like a refresher for me here.
Well, it's
I'm
odd
like
to run
remembering
across
things.
somebody in philosophy who's encountered it. Usually it's just culinary people who've encountered it. And it's, a lot of discussions happening. It's more oriented towards food than to drinking, so it doesn't fit completely into the symposium context.
It's one of those things, you read one thing by someone, then you read another thing, and then it leads you to something else. Did a lot of on my own reading and stuff.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. We know about some other drinking party and table conversation from a few other texts like Cicero or Diogenes Laertes, and then of course from Plutarch in the Symposiums, where he has these characters doing a symposium kind of thing and talking. It's very self-referential. They're talking about the nature of symposiums and how they ought to be. But this is much later work. So, any questions about literary monuments? What we do here? By the way, I highly recommend reading these things. great tests. Get a lot out of it. Okay, so one of the key themes that I think you can identify in looking at Plato and Xenophon and Plutarch is what we could, oh, there's a woodchuck, is what you could call moderation and enjoyment. Plutarch talks about this the most. The idea, for example, we talked about the not quite master of ceremonies, the master of drink, having to be of a certain kind of character. You don't want somebody who's too strict because they won't give anybody the wine that they want, right? You don't want somebody who's too lenient because they'll let everybody get too drunk. And what's wrong with that? Why not let everybody drink as much as they want? Well, there's other things at work there. In order to have a really good time, I think about some of the times that you've gone out with friends to the bar. Are the best times that you've ever had the ones where you just got completely drunk and can't remember anything, and maybe woke up in the park, missing some clothes or something like that the next day? Or are they the times where you drank some and you ran into some really interesting people and you had some conversations and some really fun things came out of them? That's what they were aiming at. So they wanted to try to have sort of like a broad spectrum of enjoyment. And if you indulge in any one element too much, you're going to screw up the other ones. So you don't want to get too drunk, but you want to drink enough that you're buzzed. You want to be able to joke with people. That's an important part of it. You see that in Xenophon, you see that in Plato. Plutarch, he gives rules, as Plutarch tends to do, for just what kind of joking should be permissible and how much of it should go on and what kind of people to seat next to each other because they won't be able to take a joke. And if you think about that, that does make good sense. You don't want it to be totally humorless, right? That's not as much fun. But you don't want people bullying each other. You don't want them picking on each other and people getting angry and leaving the house. There's a debate in Xenophon's whether they should introduce perfumes and colognes and things like that to try to have the sensual enjoyment of odor. And Socrates says, no, we got to draw the line there. We've already got the drinking, we've got the spectacle, we've got the music, we've got the conversation. We don't need to smell anything. The smells we've got are already enough. And there's this entire idea running through it of we ought to be somewhat rational in how we unwind, how we get away from the purely, work rational utilitarian stuff over here. We don't want to just degenerate into debauchery because that's not going to actually be as fun. So what do you guys think about this idea? Does that make sense?
That whole idea of being civilized.
Mm.
We're going to go
That's
have
a good
drink.
one too, yeah.
This is a nice civilized meal. You're having some good food and some good drink.
Something over the top, gaudy. Yeah. Well, they have entertainment too. I mean, in Plato's they send away the flute because they're going to talk about love instead. In Xenophon's they have these dancers doing these, from what we have in the description, pretty incredible routines. That would be part of it. Actually, the guy who's in charge of the dancing gets mad at Socrates because Socrates is talking while he's trying to do his show, and he turns on Socrates and tries to get one over on him, and that doesn't go very well. His magic wits of Socrates is generally pay off. Any other questions or comments about that part? So, think about where we are today now. We're having our own little, this is not quite a symposium because I'm giving a long speech, but we are getting to drink, and maybe we'll have some conversation about this afterwards. We still have plenty of apple cider left. Why are our academic affairs so formal in this sense, so lacking in these elements of spectacle, music, joking even? Yeah.
I have a question. Is this kind of dry, stodgy side of education, academia, worldwide, culture-wide, or is this something that we see
More
taken to greater extremes in America versus other cultures?
Good question. I'm not really well equipped to answer it. I've never done like some sort of comparative study. Yeah.
I think the Swiss program that I was just in it's a really valid point. We're very constrained. I think our culture, American culture, is more extreme. Where it's either aesthetic or completely hedonistic. And there was much more of a sense when we were closing one of our lectures. It was 35 straight hours over 3 days of lecture with one professor, and to kind of cap it off, she brought in wine and cheese, and we talked about what we would be doing next with the research work that we had started in our course. And it was completely natural. I was one of 4 American students in the program, and everyone else, it was sort of an expectation. And to me, it was like, wow, that's really a nice surprise. And we can do that, I think, here at the CIA a lot more than other places can, that sort of breaking bread and talking to one another. But,
we would do that in graduate school after class.
Informal.
Yeah.
I had a philosophy class when I was a junior, I believe, where this was towards the end of the year, and the professor was like, everybody grab your stuff, we're walking to the bar down the street, that's where we're having class. So, I mean, it really did. I went to a very liberal performing arts skewed, school.
Yeah,
so
you probably wouldn't do that at a state school.
Probably not at, a state school. But, or maybe, some professors, they'll push the envelope and do stuff like that. But nobody got wasted or anything. He just bought a couple pictures and we sat around and had class. Like we normally would. There's only 7 of us in the class, so it was...
One of the big problems would be everyone having to be 21.
Well, it was a higher level class too, so...
Yeah. That could set up some obstacles. I think even when it comes to adults and these academic affairs, one of the things... So historically, one of the things that happened is the symposium idea got sort of sublimated, and they stripped away a lot of elements. So it became just discourse. And you can see this even in commentary in the Renaissance on the Symposium, because Plato's Symposium is supposed to be about love. It's not supposed to be about having fun, screwing around, that sort of thing. We have to put it way up here, and so they idealize it, and then all these other elements kind of get dropped out of the process. The other thing to think about is if you want to do this moderation of enjoyment, you need a certain kind of person to be able to do that. And I think over time, a lot of people have become distrustful, and maybe academics are partly to blame for this because of their behavior, of just letting people enjoy themselves while we're talking about some sort of, complex intellectual topic. As if, if we go to the bar and we talk about it, everyone's just going to be watching the TV, or yelling at each other, or flirting with each other, or pick whatever else you like. Yeah.
One of the things I particularly like is, the word imbibe has those 2 meanings. There's the idea of sort of like participating in libations, and then also participating in inquiry and experiencing things. And I think that our educational model here facilitates that a lot better. Even today's event, coming together, building a fire, which is a very kind of primal act of community, and sitting around and having drinks together and having conversation, and having it not be something that's in front of a whiteboard or a blackboard, or it's nice to be able to do that. But sometimes it's the pace, I think too, of academia, that we're constantly moving from zone to zone and project to project, and we forget how crucial and critical this type of activity is to really learning and engaging with material in a different way. Being relaxed, having conversations about topics, not just figuring out, do I need to take these 5 pieces of information you've just given me and remember them, or can I really get my arms around the whole thing?
The other thing is, though, in today's world, I think it's also become complementary. Because I know that if I go to, I go to give a paper at a conference somewhere,
we'll drink afterwards.
Right. It doesn't matter if I hear any of the other papers. I don't listen to the other papers. I pick out the people who I want to get to know. The people who are maybe valuable.
That's because you're an experience conference going.
But that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you go mad.
There's no time in those things.
Right. No,
You go 4 days without sleeping.
Right. There was.
And then feel like you've missed out on things.
Right. I was at a conference in Spain a few years ago, and they were all 10-minute papers, and they had 100 papers a day in the one venue hall, right? But the bar was outside the door of the venue hall.
Oh.
So you opened the door of the lecture theatre, and the bar was right in front of you.
Yeah.
And they were still going at 8 o'clock at night. There was 5 people listening to the lecture, and there was 200 people in the bar. But the people in the bar were doing more business than the guys in the lecture hall.
Yeah.
You know, it's very much
conversation in there's more interesting.
Right. You need both. You need the pull of the stodginess and the academic atmosphere to get people there, and then the informality to get them talking to one.